Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 210. Thank you for joining us. Today we continue our conversation that we started in episode 202 with homeschooling mother of 8, Deirdre Mundy. Homeschooling takes on many forms, so we're happy to share the experiences of this veteran homeschooling mom with all of you. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Kolbe Academy.
As Stephen mentioned, back in episode 202, which you can find linked in the show notes for this episode or by scrolling back just a bit in your podcast feed, Deirdre spoke about homeschool flexibility in several iterations. She has a lot more to say about that, so this episode is a continuation of that conversation. Let's get back to our visit with Deirdre. So this whole idea of flexibility, you've mentioned several ways that you make that work for your family, and you've mentioned a few ways also that you do that with the Kolbe curriculum and the materials from Kolbe. Is there more you want to say about how you exercise flexibility with the Kolbe materials to suit your family's needs?
I know we talked about before this that I don't do the reading comprehension questions for any of the literature, history, theology. My children hate writing reading comprehensions out. I hate grading reading comprehension questions. And because we're talking about the books, I know they understood them. And they're already reading them and thinking about them. And then my son came up to me the other day and he said, "Do you think Plato and Aristotle would have ever gotten into a fist fight?" He's like, "Because I don't see how they agree on anything." And he was really annoyed by something or other Plato did in the Republic. So he was like ranting about the Republic, and he's more of an Aristotelian himself. He can't stand Plato. He likes reading Plato, but only to criticize Plato. But so because they like to argue, or I'll ask them questions about their reading. We don't really have to do the reading comprehension questions. And what I'm interested in for any of the literature from even the elementary school on because in elementary school you start with those little 1-paragraph essays and it works its way up to a real college level essay, which is great. I love how Kolbe scaffolds their writing straight through. So I'm interested in the essays because I want to know what they're thinking, how their reasoning is, if their reasoning is valid, if they have any interesting thoughts. If they totally missed the point of something, it will show up in the essays. And I enjoy grading the essays more. So we tend to skip, how they have this long list of 50 reading comprehension questions for every darn reading section. We just don't do this. I tried with one child. There were lots of tears. We all hated it, not only from her, also from me for having to grade them, because some of them are over really minuscule points. And I'm like, I don't even remember now. I'm going to have to go look at, So I don't do the reading comprehension questions.
Okay.
I will for the Catholic National Readers, and this is why, especially the 6th grade Catholic National Reader is far above a 6th grade level. I don't know if you've noticed this. Some of the essays in there, if you actually try to level them out, they're more 12th grade level. Especially there was one about philosophy of French monasticism or something in the 6th grade reader. And my kid brought it to me. She's like, "Mom, this is really hard. And I'm not sure what to say." I start reading this. This is not a 6th grade reading. But so for those, the reading comprehension questions, there are many fewer of them. And we'll usually do them orally because just writing them all out is a pain in the neck. And it's the sort of assignment I hated when I was their age. So I don't make them do it either. And I hate grading it. So that's one way I'm sort of flexible in that. Also, actually, originally with my eldest, she wanted to go for either honors or Kolbe diplomas in every single class. But the thing is, because she is my oldest is not good with names, especially if you're reading something with a lot of people with kind of similar names. Those Kolbe exams were horrific for her because she could tell you everything about a character and forget his name. Right. And she could analyze the character and do great literature, but she wouldn't remember his name. And so we actually hit this point. I'm like, look, we don't have to go for the Kolbe designation. what I want you to get out of this class is the readings and the essays and preparation for college. Colleges don't actually care whether you have the Kolbe designation or not. They don't know. And they look at what you've been reading and especially if you're a homeschooler, they usually want you to submit some graded writing samples. So they know what you're reading and writing. They don't actually care at that point about whether you have the K next to it on your diploma or not, right? Or on your transcript. So I told her, look, you hate doing these exams. You're doing terribly on them. We don't have to do them because I don't actually care if you can complete this particular written exam. I care about the essays you're writing. And I want you to be writing me good essays on Sophocles with good arguments and quotes from, I want a good college quality essay. And so we just dropped doing the exams. And then my second daughter probably could have gone for honors or Kolbe in everything if she wanted to, but she's like, you know what? I don't really have to. And this way we can just submit my 4 favorite papers I wrote a semester and make someone other than you read them. So, or 2 favorite papers a semester. I forget how many it's anyway. But so we just submit the papers and don't bother with the Kolbe designation because it works for us. And again, I care about, they need to have a transcript to apply to college. I don't actually care that much about their grades though, because I want them to learn the things I want them to learn. So that's where anything like that, where it was causing my kids undue stress and not actually geared towards my educational goals, I just dropped. And to do that, you kind of have to have an idea of what your goals are. But the nice thing about Kolbe is it lets you do that. It lets you say, hey, my goals are for my kids to read all of these Greek texts and write great papers on all of them, but I don't actually care about X, Y, or Z, and you can still do that. You won't get the magic K designation, but you can still run a really good class for your kids. And my child who's in the engineering school, she was coming, she's like, I don't understand it. I get an A on every single paper I write, even if I'm not trying that. And I'm like, that's because you basically have a 4-year degree in a humanities major, not at like a top college, but at like a medium college. And so, yes, this is why you can do that, because we're already writing almost decent college papers by the end of freshman year. Because for me, I'm this again, mean mother, when I'm grading the papers for me and making them rewrite, I think, would this get at least a B in freshman humanities at the University of Chicago? And if it would not get a B there, it gets sent home. So okay. I probably need to like modulate at some point, but it works. They learn to write a good paper. And then, so that's where like the flex, but so even doing Kolbe and not getting the magic K, my kid is still like college level humanities as an engineering major. They're like her easy relaxing classes where she has fun. So that's where Kolbe's flexibility is really nice. I know a lot of other curriculum want you to do exactly what they told you to and turn in exactly all the things. And with Kolbe, you can give your kids a really great education, but not stress yourself or your kids out either about the paperwork aspect, which I think is important to be able to focus on what we actually want them to learn.
So with your focus on essays and discussion, if for folks listening who are like, well, I don't know what to look for in a paper, do you have 1 or 2 things that broadly speaking to kind of get us rolling if we're reviewing our kids' written work?
Okay. So 1, they should have a clear thesis. They need to be making an argument. Now, not so much for the theology papers that are basically summary papers, because a lot of those are just like summarize what you read. But if you're actually making an argument about the book, you need to stake out your thesis and make it clear what you're arguing in the first paragraph. And then you need examples from the text supporting the argument you're making. Now, something to point out to your kids, especially with literature papers, is a lot of times there's not a right or a wrong answer for many of these things. You can use the same text to make 2 completely different opposite arguments, because when you take a quote from the book, you're also explaining how that quote applies to your argument. So if you think about it, the traditional 5-paragraph essay form is actually a really great way to teach kids to write an essay, even though later they're going to be writing longer argument papers that don't fit. But if you always think about, you need to introduce what you're arguing, have middle sections supporting your argument and tying it back to the text, and then a conclusion just sort of summing up. Just that sort of way of thinking about literature papers specifically will make, if they're doing that, if they're supporting their argument well, they're writing a good paper. In terms of like spelling and grammar, you want to go through and correct that. What I do is I make them stand over me while I correct their papers, because the annoyance of watching me correct spelling and add commas and fix things and then make them go back and fix it in the final draft. Because I always make them go back and fix it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough punishment. But if I make them go back and fix it, that particular annoyance then causes them to be more careful in the future to avoid it. So do not expect their first drafts to have perfect grammar, punctuation, everything, because when they're working on getting the ideas out, they might not be paying attention to mechanics. So if your kids' first drafts are messy, that doesn't mean they're a bad writer. It just means they have to learn how to revise and do better in the final draft. And that's something I see people worrying about a lot. But my kids' first drafts are often fairly rough too. It's just I force them to fix them because that's what you do in a class for the writing. So I mean that's kind of like the baseline what to look for, I think, though, is you want them to be clearly supporting their argument. You're teaching them to think. So
and if you're having discussions, what's a good jumping off point? Like,
I mean, it depends on the book, right? So sometimes, because my kids are ranters, they will come to me with something that annoyed them about a particular author. And then we can use that as a jumping off point. Well, then why is this book valuable? Why do you think it's in the reading list? What good ideas did this author have? What can you see from this work that we still have in the world around us now? What kind of universal truths about human nature? Like, encouraging them to look for like universals, because you might be like, oh gosh, I don't get this whole Wrath of Achilles thing. Gosh, why is he being such a whiny baby? And then you can kind of, even like, okay, well, do you know anything? Have you ever seen anything? Where else have you heard about pride and pride causing injury? Things like that, right? So you can kind of tie it to other things they know. The Kolbe essays actually do a really good job doing that, which is why I would encourage you to have your child write every essay. Even if you're not going to turn in every essay they write, even if they're going to write some bad essays, the essays actually help them think about the books. That's the point, right? And then also in discussions, if it's a book that I have my own axe to grind, I'll bring up my particular axes to grind or point out things that I think are important. I have very talky kids. So our problem is usually not getting them to discuss things they've read. It's getting them to stop. There are certain arguments we've had to ban at the dinner table, that sort of thing, because people just get too heated. But basically, you want to talk about the ideas in the books, not just about what happened, especially at the high school level. These books are here not because, oh, this is a great plot. They're here because they're really important. They form the basis for a lot of other things in our civilization. I mean, and again, that gets easier once you hit Augustine, right? Because then suddenly you're like, oh, I know this man. He makes sense to me. I understand him. And the medievals make sense to us. But for Roman Greece, what you're looking for the foundations of what later became the church and Western civilization and all of these things, because the church fathers were actually in conversation with these older works. There's the famous Saint Jerome and Cicero, right, where God appears to be a dream and asks him if he's a Christian or a Ciceronian, and because Jerome loved Cicero so much and spent so much time reading Cicero. And I mean, so we've got there's this conversation that spans all of written human history, basically, right? I mean, like Kolbe doesn't do ancient Near East, but even like Gilgamesh is in conversation almost with later writers and things like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Kind of, you can see the same themes that are in the Iliad and the Odyssey that are in, when you're discussing with them the ideas, to kind of bring them into this great conversation, this human conversation that has never stopped about why are we here? What is man? Why is the world this way? What is a good life? That's actually the big question, I think, that you need to that's through all of this. What is a good man and what is a good life? Even in the pagans, this is what they're struggling with. And then you eventually get the answer to that later, right? Or sort of, but we're all wrestling with it in our own lives. So that's my kind of, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, that's my big point for discussion, is bringing them into this conversation that has been going on around them ever since man developed speech.
And I always love that. I mean, when people talk about those Greek texts, I mean, it's interesting because it is different, but it's also close, and you think about the Greeks as kind of like taking basically taking human thought about virtue and what's worth living about as far as you could take it without Christianity, right? And then to be able to see, but it's different, it's not our Lord. Achilles isn't acting exactly like our Lord, but why would he? What? Then you see that the beauty of the, especially in a post-Christian era today, that's really valuable to see. This was a significant change that happened in the world, and yeah, I get excited about it myself.
And just also actually the whole concept of personhood and who's a person, because to the Greeks, you weren't really a person unless you were kind of in their crowd or a guest friend, right? And really, if you look through these ancient works, there's not this idea of universal human brotherhood, or that all people are also persons, until Jesus. It was revolutionary, this idea that people who weren't in your clan or your family or at your social level had human dignity. It's this kind of like earthquake in the way we think about people compared to the ancients. And that is actually where my kids get kind of cranky, because they're like, but why are they treated now? Well, again, this is in their worldview. This person wasn't really a person. They were property, or they were just a thing, right? They weren't really fully human. They were other. And so so that's also fun to discuss too. But yeah, so reading these helps you see how revolutionary Christianity was, that it was actually something different and something humans would not have come up with on their own. If that makes sense. Like if you have a human religion that's fully human, you always have some people you're allowed to kill. So where it's really interesting. There are a lot of things about Christianity that people wouldn't come up with on their own. Also, as an aside, because I was ranting at my children about this week, Acts is clearly a historical document and not something some cult made up to get new followers. Because if you were writing a religious text to get new followers, would you point out everyone involved in the founding of our religion, except the guy we say is God, was a complete idiot? I mean, the whole Acts is like Peter screwed up, then Paul screwed up, then Peter screwed up, then Paul. Oh, and Paul gave a speech so boring, a kid fell out the window and died. I mean, if you were trying to actually market your religion as opposed to writing truth, would you even put that in there? No. So anyway, so it's really interesting too, reading the ancient texts and seeing what purely human versus divinely inspired. And again, you get to Augustine and suddenly it's like, I know this man. He makes sense. He thinks like me, it's kind of, so that's, I don't know. I think it's really, and I love how Kolbe scaffolds towards that actually. Like it does. I love the scaffolding of the high school.
Yeah, and how it all integrates. Yes, and that does make it far more approachable for folks who don't have that background themselves. Like, okay, yeah. You mentioned earlier your college-age daughter. Is there more you want to say about how Kolbe has served her and your soon-to-be college, your kids close to college, or other things relating to college?
She's gone in with, one reason I did want to do full Kolbe humanities and theology is because if my children did grow up to be engineering majors or something, they would have a good basis in the liberal arts. Because I've noticed that a lot of kind of, you get siloed in college sometimes, and I wanted to make sure they had a good kind of basis. But also in terms of if people are concerned about like preparing kids for faith in college, especially, Kolbe theology, they end up reading most of the catechism. In fact, we were discussing it in the car the other day. They were like, if you include in the faith and life, the catechism sections at the end, they're like, we may have hit almost all of the catechism at some point through from like second grade on, right, or first grade on. So they understand their faith and why the church teaches things, and they don't have a cartoon idea of what the church teaches. And I think that makes them easier to kind of engage in your faith in college. My daughter in Cleveland, Case Western doesn't have a huge Catholic student population. They have a Newman Center, but it's based out of the Little Italy Holy Rosary Parish. And so the kids go to mass in the parish, and they have a mix of, once a night college student night, where they have dinner and talk about theology. And then, but they also like go caroling with the parish, or like help with the parish, like service activities, or, that kind of thing. And it actually is, I'm getting kind of sick of the about why Holy Rosary is better than our home parish. But that's Holy Rosary in Cleveland is a really good parish. But they have people driving from the suburbs for it. So when my kids were like 4 and 2, my two oldest were 4 and 2, we went to the Rockford Family Conference one year with our friends who had homeschooled with Kolbe, like my friends' parents. And there was a talk there by some guy, I can't even remember his name, but the theme was God has no grandchildren. And it was basically about how you cannot guarantee that when your child grows up, they will make the choices you want them to make. Their relationship with God is their relationship with God, not you controlling their relationship with God. And I mean, part of the point of the talk was that if you try to say, make sure your child never makes any mistakes once they leave your house, you're kind of setting them up to leave the church, right? The beautiful thing about Kolbe is it gives kids enough theology and a robust enough faith that you can trust that. I mean, everyone's going to make mistakes, but you can trust that at least they know what the church is and they have a relation. I mean, assuming you've been taking them to like mass and adoration and confession, obviously too, you can't just have Kolbe do all the work for you. You have to actually live the faith as a family as well. But they have a good enough basis that at least they know what they have and they know what they would be leaving if they left, if that makes any sense. And part of that is because Kolbe does really embrace the concepts of faith and reason, right? There are a lot of people who might shy away from reason, but the way Kolbe really does understand that the kind of two wings are faith and reason, it gives kids the sort of solid grounding that I feel like I can just send them out in the world. I mean, obviously they're not always going to make every choice I would make for them, because if they're like a 20-year-old kid, I remember what I was like when I was 20. But I know they have a good foundation. You don't have to feel like you have to send them to one of these super controlling colleges, because otherwise they might stray. They have a good, they have a good basis. They can go anywhere where I mean, obviously my kids are still looking for places where it's easy to get to mass for college, but if you're going in a city, it's easy to get to mass if you're in the north. I know, like, I have friends near Nashville, it's harder, but like, it's like in our part of the country, in the Midwest, there are always lots of churches. So I don't know. But I really appreciate the whole firm grounding in the catechism. I just feel like they're ready. They've had a chance to start developing an adult faith by the time they leave high school.
There are reasons, and here's where to find them. Yes.
Well, yeah. And here are the great doctors of the church too. Oh my gosh. I mean, like, the medieval year is so much fun.
That's great. I love it. Well, as the admin for the unofficial Facebook group, do you see any recurrent themes that you would like to speak to?
Other than the questions about how do I navigate the website? Oh my gosh, PowerSchool, I don't know what button to click, and the technical questions. The biggest ones I see are actually often people who are forgetting that even if your kid is bright and curious, there's also brain development and developmental things. And so for instance, if you have a kindergartner and you're homeschooling them, you don't need 6 hours of activities a day to keep them busy. For me personally, I feel like kindergarten, first and second grade are mostly learning basic arithmetic and phonics, right? Learning kind of those very basic skills. And other than that, you don't need a formal science curriculum. You can just take them for a walk around the neighborhood and talk to them about those ants on the tree, that kind of thing. And for history, you can just visit living history sites for fun as a family. If they're in your, or they have any of the like living history pioneers, maple sugaring, all that kind of fun stuff. And things like that, where especially with like the K-3 crowd, a lot of them want more rigorous and more laid out school that's really developmentally appropriate for those grades. And I try to remind them that until recently, Kolbe didn't even offer kindergarten through second grade. When my eldest started out, I don't think they had kindergarten or first grade. They had like suggested materials, but they didn't have syllabi. That was added later because people were asking for it. But it's not actually, unless your state is really psychotic with their homeschool laws, really kindergarten, first and second don't need to be super academic. You want them to learn prep for first communion, arithmetic, and work on phonics. Also, the other point is not all kids learn to read at the same time. I do have a dyslexic kid of doom, and that was pretty obvious early on. But for a lot of kids, some kids learn in kindergarten, some learn in first, some it doesn't really click till second. But if they're moving forward and they have the phonological understanding to be able to understand rhymes and sounds, with my kindergartners, we'll read about Egypt or we'll read about the things they're interested in science, like if they're on a volcano kick. But kindergarten through second grade, if you're doing those basics, it's okay to just follow their fads and their interests, right? One thing I did with my eldest two, when they were like kindergarten and second grade, we lived close to South Bend, Indiana. We joined the zoo up there, and I would just take them to the zoo twice a week and at different times of the day, so they could visit their favorite animals and see what they were doing at different times of the day and different seasons. And that was amazingly educational, because for that age level, a lot of book work and paperwork is not actually educational. And that's the kind of the big thing I see coming up again and again in the group. And it's always, because we're all like that with our first kid, right? We're like, we haven't had as much experience in child development. We're so excited because here's this little person and they want to learn things and we can teach them. And I think almost all new homeschooling moms get ahead of themselves that first year and have to recalibrate. So I'm going to give all the new moms this advice, not to push the kids too fast. It's okay to take it easy. Remember that, you can learn science by taking a walk around the block at those lower grades and things like that. I know they're not going to listen to me because I didn't listen to that advice when I was new. No one ever listens to that advice. But then after you crash and burn, remember, it's okay to take it easy with your kindergarten through second grader, and they do not need to be occupied with school for as long as the school kids in the public school are occupied with school. So other than that, it's mostly people asking for help on technical issues, or we get a lot of, oh my gosh, freshman year is so hard. And then we all say, yes, it is really hard. It's the hardest year, because it's just everyone kind of going through the same, we're all going through the same stuff, but like a couple of years staggered. So it's,
Yep. True.
But, and then there's also, that's right, the people who feel like they have to finish every book completely every year. And then they get to the end of the school year and everybody's done. And everyone passed their hands and said, it's okay. Public schools never finish the whole book either. That's actually a lot of the group is kind of just reminding people it's okay. And your kid's not going to fit your perfect image of how the school year was going to go ever. And the beautiful thing with Kolbe is, even if you do like a 50% job on Kolbe, your kid's still going to come out ahead of where they would have been in the public school. So, it's kind of that whole, like, if you shoot for heaven and miss and hit purgatory, that's still great. So it's just sort of one of those things, like, even if you're not 100% doing Kolbe perfectly, it is still going to really prepare your child well for the rest of their life. And nobody can do school perfectly all the time because we have lives. And you're really just trying to give your kid the best you can, not this platonic ideal of the perfect school year. So,
yep. Good stuff. Well, as we're coming to the end of our time together, do you have any final thoughts or takeaways you want to leave with our listeners?
Really, though, I think it's just basically, so Kolbe is flexible. The Kolbe counselors will help you if you're ever confused about what you can or can't do, or if you need help figuring out how to modify things for your kids. You can ask for advice, and they have it because they have a lot of advice. And just remember, because Kolbe from the start, like, even if you like, I don't remember, it was always like very prominent in their like kind of new parent stuff. And I haven't looked at the new parent stuff for a few years, so I'm assuming it's still there. It was always very clear on parents are the primary educators of their child. And Kolbe is here to help you educate your child. Kolbe is not educating your child. You are. They're offering you the support you need to give your child the education you want. So it's not like Kolbe is this God who you must follow in all things. You can change things. You can be flexible. You can ask for help. This is all about support. It is not a super rigid curriculum. There are choices. You can go up or down depending on what your kid needs. And that is why I love it, because you can be flexible, and every one of your kids is going to be completely different. If you're just starting out, what works for your second grader, your kindergartner might be someone totally different. Your child who isn't born yet maybe some bizarre creature you never even imagined possible. And that's fine. Every kid is different. Modify it for your kids and what they need, and keep your own kind of family's goals for what you want in education in your mind. Oh, and random, this is totally off topic, but not. I do recommend, if your kids want to go to college, the CLT looks really good, but not everyone takes it yet. Work with your local school systems or local private schools to get them to take the PSAT and the SATs and whatever other, several of the Kolbe classes you could take an AP test on pretty easily with just a little extra studying. Like even their chemistry is really, it's almost AP chemistry. There are like 2 or 3 other things you have to add in. So if your kid is planning to go to college, take the standardized tests, because colleges don't know as a homeschooler if you're like, yay, I'm going to give my child A's even though he's just finger painting every day. Or if you're like a crazy mother like me who's like, well, this is a C paper, I'm not going to accept it, right? So the standardized tests are nice because they prove that mom wasn't crazy. And actually, if you don't have the option of having your kids sit in a class at the local high school like we do, I would probably take at least one online class or 2. So there is someone who wasn't mom who graded their work at some point. Just because there's a lot of stereotypes about homeschoolers, and especially people always remember the bad homeschoolers they ran into. So it's good to get a little bit of more objectivity in there if your kid's planning on going to college, just so you can prove that, yes, I gave them a good education. So that would be my other kind of, I know that wasn't directly to but I forgot to say that earlier.
Yeah.
So in terms of preparing for high school and college, I would recommend that, okay, kind of including that, so you can show that objectively people who aren't you also think your child is capable.
Right.
But
good experience for the kids too.
Yeah, it's a good experience for the kids too. Oh, National History Day. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this program. It is open to homeschoolers. It is an annual program where they have a big theme like conflict and compromise or turning points in history. Your child can do either a poster, a one man or multiple, if they're with another kid, multiple people drama, a paper, a website, or a documentary. They compete at like the local, regional, national, state, national levels. They get judged by actual college professors telling them where their research could have been better. And they can pretty much squeeze anything they're interested in into that topic. We will often use National History Day for like the freshman research paper. I just have them do a National History Day project and turn that in instead if we're taking the English class. But I highly recommend getting your kids involved in this if possible. Like you can figure out how it works in your state, because it is a great experience to research something you're interested in, have to come up with a strong thesis statement that fits the theme, present your research to a panel of judges, and then have adults who are experts in the field take your work seriously. And I mean, they're not mean. They're very nice because they're happy kids are doing history, but they take the kids' work seriously and give them really good feedback. And then that's really great for them. And it teaches them to take feedback, not from mom. They're usually better about feedback that doesn't come from mom, actually. And then you can actually compete. It's a great nerd sport as well. So I would highly recommend looking into that for your kids. And that's another somebody else looking at your kids' work who's not you. And, and it's fun for the kids. So.
I've seen that mentioned. We have not done that, but I've seen that and looked in. Yeah, it looks great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. And especially if you've got nerdy kids who like to tell you about their interests, they can tell someone who's not family about their interests. So my daughter, who's a senior, went to nationals, and it was when she was in junior high, and she had such a great time because you were just in this, like they have all these special like history oriented backstage tours of things in DC and stuff, but also just being on a college campus for a week with all these kids who were just as nerdy as she was amazing. So that was, it was a great experience, but it's fun for them. Some of mine have the problem that they get really involved in the research and then don't want to pull back and actually finish the project and present their research. So it's also a good lesson to learn when to stop researching and start writing.
Yeah.
But it's open to homeschoolers, and it's like $15 a kid, depending on your state. So it's not like expensive. It's open to homeschoolers. it's a good experience. And there aren't that many things open to homeschoolers. So it's nice to find one that's a kind of fun nerd sport that's open to homeschoolers.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds great. All right, listeners. So our show notes for this episode are going to contain links to some of the things we already mentioned today. Also, a couple of Kolbecast episodes that are relevant to our conversation, including one about writing papers. We had a few of the Kolbe ladies come visit with us on an episode called Parent in Service First Draft. So that's more good stuff about reviewing our kids' writing. That'd be helpful. Also wanted to call attention to the Kolbe website, kolbe.org/podcast. If you go to that page on the Kolbe website, kolbe.org/podcast, we have filters in place there where you can search all of our Kolbecast episodes. We have a filter for parents, which will be applied to this episode and has been applied to several other episodes where we visit with parents to hear how they make Kolbe work for them and share their experience that way. So if you want to hear more from folks who are working on Kolbe every day, you can check out that parents filter on the Kolbe website and then either listen there on the website or find it in your favorite podcast app. I've really enjoyed visiting with you, Deirdre. I've seen you come up in that group so many times, and I'm so glad that it worked out for us to visit today, and really appreciate all of the gold you have shared with us. So much wisdom and great suggestions and things like that.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And if anyone has questions for me later, they can, if someone listens to this and has questions, they can just post in the Facebook group.
Good deal. Good deal.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.